Welcome to Pavonars, webinars for the pavement community. My name is Andrew Braham, and today we'll be talking about exploring the effect of asphalt concrete fabrication and compaction location on 6 compaction metrics. Something that we always struggle with in our field of study is this concept of we need to be able to work in the field, but we also need to be able to take that information in the field and be able to work with it in the lab. So you can see on the left, we're splitting an asphalt concrete sample in the field, and then we compacted it in the field. And there on the right, we're splitting an asphalt concrete sample in the lab, and then we went and compacted it in the lab. And we wanted to know what were the similarities and differences between these different types of asphalt concrete mixtures. This is based on research done by Erica Bowie when she was at the University of Arkansas. She was Erica Yeung, and this presentation is based on her work called Exploring the Effect of Asphalt Concrete Fabrication and Compaction Location on 6 Compaction Metrics. Erica obtained a Bachelor of Science in Accounting in 2009 from the University of Arkansas, and then she came over to the Civil Engineering Department and got a Bachelor's of Science in Civil Engineering in 2015 and a Master's of Science in 2017, all from the University of Arkansas. And here is a link to her LinkedIn profile, which can also be found in the comments section below. When we're thinking about asphalt concrete, why do we care about compaction? Well, in the field, when we place the asphalt concrete, there is a density of that asphalt concrete coming immediately out of the paver, and that comes from the screed. And the density is approximately 80 to 90% of the maximum density of the mixture. After it goes through the screed, we then go over the material with compactors. And you can see here on the left is a steel wheel compactor, and it can either be in a static or vibratory mode. And then on the right, there is a pneumatic compactor, and those are only in the static mode. What these do is they compact the asphalt in the field. And while we design for 96% maximum density, that's how we design all of our asphalt concrete mixtures, or 4% air voids, the final field density is anywhere between 90 and 96. This is all dependent on what type of mixture you're using and what kind of density you are targeting. But during the design phase, we are targeting for 96% maximum density. And that's important. That shows how important getting the proper air voids is, getting the proper density is, and that comes about through compaction. So this is how the asphalt concrete is compacted in the field. Well, how do we mimic this compaction in the lab? Because again, we want to try and predict what will happen in the field with laboratory performance, and then we can explore various different things in the laboratory about the asphalt concrete. So how do we mimic this compaction in the lab? Well, we need to make our samples, and there's 3 different methods that can be used to make samples. First is a slab compactor, and while some feel that this is the most representative way to make an asphalt concrete sample in the lab, it is relatively rare. The equipment is usually a little more expensive, and you end up getting a relatively large rectangular specimen that you then need to cut in some sort of way, either into cylindrical shapes or smaller square or prism type shapes. Now, we also use Marshall compaction, which is an impact compactor, and you essentially just hit the sample with a large hammer. And this is found in many older specifications and more local or regional specifications for public agencies. But by and large, in the United States, at a state level, the superpave gyratory compactor is the most common. And this uses a kneading type compactor in a cylindrical mode to make your samples. And you get cylindrical samples out of a superpave gyratory compactor. Now, what do we call these samples? There are various different techniques we can use in order to obtain the asphalt concrete. The first we call PMLC, and this stands for Plant Mix Lab Compacting. So this is where your asphalt concrete is made in a plant. So it's mixed in the drum, it's placed in a silo, and then you take a sample of that mixture and you compact it in the lab, for example, in a super pave gyratory compactor. And you do not allow the mix to cool. So this needs to be done relatively quickly after the material is taken out of the silo to try and mimic what's going to happen in the field. You do not allow it to cool. Now we can compare that to RPMLC, which is reheated plant mixed lab compacted. And this is quite a common way to get samples from the field. This is again where the material is made in a plant. So the aggregate and the asphalt binder is mixed in the drum. A sample is taken from the silo or from the truck or from the construction site, and that sample is cooled. You need to place that sample back into an oven to reheat the sample in order to compact it. So there is another cycle of cooling and heating on the mixture, and that's what we call RPMLC. Another very common way that we obtain samples is LMLC, which is lab mixed and lab compacted. And this is where we take the aggregates in the asphalt binder and we put them together and mix them in the lab, and then we directly compact them. So you can see in some ways it's similar to a PMLC because there's no reheating involved. You mix the aggregate and asphalt binder and you immediately compact it. But you're obviously doing it on a much, much different scale because as you can see here, you're using just 5-gallon buckets and it's about 5,000 grams of mixtures compared to the tons of mixtures that are made in a plant. So much different scale. And then finally there is the PMFC, which is plant mixed field compacted. And these are also known as field cores. So this is where the mixture is made in a plant, it's placed in the field, it's compacted in the field, and then a sample is extracted out. Now some feel that this is the most representative way to get a sample, which is probably true, but it also means you're cutting a hole in your road right after it was built. And I have yet to meet an agency who's excited to cut a hole in their road. So because it's destructive, that's an added consideration. So what we did in this study is we compared the first three terms. We compared the plant mix lab compacted to the reheated plant mix lab compacted to the lab mix lab compacted, and we asked the question, are these equivalent? So what we did is we went out to a job site, we were able to get samples from that job site and immediately compact them. We also took samples from the job site, put them in buckets and let them cool, and then returned to the lab, reheated it, and compacted it. And then finally, we took samples of the aggregate and the asphalt binder from the plant. We took it back to the lab. We mixed the two materials together, and we compacted. So we used the PMLC, the RPMLC, and the LMLC in this study. And we asked the question, are these equivalent? Well, in order to ask the question, are these equivalent, we need to somehow quantify the lab compaction behavior. And there's been quite a bit of work done on this. Some of the more common quantifications of compaction in the lab are the CDI and the TDI. The CDI is the construction densification index, and you can see it's the area under the density versus number of gyrations curve from 8 gyrations to 92% density. And this is intended to simulate the construction compacting in the field. So this is what the rollers are going for. The TDI, the traffic densification index, is intended to simulate how much traffic compacts the sample. So over time, because there are air voids in asphalt concrete, the traffic will densify your mixture a little bit. And the TDI is defined as 92 to 98% density, the area under the curve above the 92% line. So that's the CDI and the TDI, and these were developed at the University of Wisconsin under Hussein Bahia's leadership. Two more that have been examined are the WEI, the Workability Energy Index, and the CEI, the Compactability Energy Index. And the WEI, you can see, is the area from 0 gyrations to 92% density, and the CEI is from 92% density to our design, 96% density, the area under the curve above 92% density. So these are just two different ways to quantify it. And then finally, a fifth one that we examined is N92, and that is how many gyrations it takes to get to 92% density. Now, while there are more compaction metrics out there, and a lot of interesting work has been done with these compaction metrics, these were the 5 that we focused on in this study. And specifically, we took a very deep look at CDI, WEI, and CEI. And what we did is we took a look at these compaction metrics, so how we can quantify laboratory compaction behavior, and we looked at two types of material, and then we also looked at different compaction pressures and compaction temperatures. So here's our experimental matrix. We have our CDI, WEI, CEI, and N92. So those are the 4 that we looked at. Our compaction temperatures were from 93 to 135 degrees Celsius, and our compaction pressures were 200 kilopascals to 600 kilopascals. Now, the superpave gyratory compactor during mixed design process is intended to be run at 600 kilopascals pressure, but we wanted to see what would happen when we decrease the pressure a little bit in the superpave gyratory compactor. So the mixed design, because the superpave gyratory compactor during the design process is set at 600 kilopascal. That's what was used during the mixed design process. And the mixed design temperature was 106 degrees Celsius. And that is because this was a chemically modified warm mix asphalt. That was the primary mix that we looked at. Now at the very end, we looked at a couple other mixtures, but the vast majority of data in this presentation is using a chemically modified warm mix asphalt. All of the data is a 12.5 millimeter nominal maximum aggregate size, so it's a surface course, and we used a PG 58-28 binder. And like I said, the majority is chemically modified warm mix asphalt, but there is one slide looking at different types of asphalt, and we'll get to that a little later. Now, this was the mobile lab that we used, and this mobile lab allowed us to look at the plant mix lab compacted. So we set this trailer up. This is a 360-degree view of the trailer. When you walk in the door, immediately to your left is a Marshall compactor. There was a bulk water bath, a little bit of storage, a load frame, area for computers. Then the superpave gyratory compactor you can see is the large green machine about a third of the way through the image. Directly in front of you is a small sinks and some scales and such. To the right, a water bath, a maximum specific gravity rice shaker, a small sieve, and then a small oven. So this is a very nice little lab that we were allowed to use, and this allowed us to take samples off of the paving train and immediately take them to this mobile lab and compact them in that gyratory compactor in the image. So as I mentioned, we sampled the aggregate and the binder from the plant that produced the asphalt concrete. And then we took asphalt concrete samples from the job at the paver, and that allowed us to not only look at the PMLC, but we took additional asphalt concrete samples, brought them back into the lab to look at the reheated PMLC, and then also with the aggregate and the binder, we were able to look at the lab mix lab compacted, or LMLC. So the first thing that we looked at was the reheated plant mixed lab compacted, that is RPMLC, and the first thing we looked at is the CDI, or the Construction Densification Index, and you can see the data on the left. So taking a look at that data, what we expected was as we increase the pressure, the CDI, the Construction Densification Index, should decrease. As we increase the temperature, we also expected the CDI to decrease. But what actually happened was, as the pressure was increased, the CDI did decrease. But interestingly, as the temperature was increased, the CDI was not quite as conclusive, especially when you're up there at the 600 kilopascals, kind of regardless of the compaction temperature, all of the data fell on itself. So using the typical mixed design procedures at 600 kilopascals of pressure on your superpave gyratory compactor, we really didn't see a big difference in CDI. As we got to lower compaction pressures, the 93 degrees Celsius did start to separate a little bit, which is what we expected. However, it was not statistically significant. And one of the things we thought of, because this is a chemically modified warm mix asphalt, we were wondering if the full benefits of the chemically modified warm mix asphalt would not be seen at these temperatures, and maybe we even needed to go a little cooler. So that was something that we thought we could potentially look at in future research. Now looking at the plant mix laboratory compacted N92, this is how many gyrations it takes to get to 92% density, and you can see the trends are relatively similar to CDI. So as you increase the pressure, you expected a decrease in N92, and as you increase the temperature, you also expected a decrease in N92. But again, you really didn't see those effects, especially at 600 kilopascals compaction pressure. Now, another interesting thing is what we're looking at here is just the PMLC, but the RPMLC and the PMLC did behave in a similar fashion, where the lab mix lab compacted we felt behaved differently. Now, while CDI and N92 in general, we expected to see similar trends, higher pressure and higher temperatures equaled lower CDIs and N92s, but we expected the CEI and the WEI to show opposite trends. And they did. So with the CEI, we looked at the RPMLC and the LMLC. And as expected, as the pressure increased, the CEI increased. And as the temperature increased, we expected to see the CEI increase. But again, that's not quite what we saw. With the pressure, we saw an increase of CEI, but with the temperature, we really didn't see that increase in CEI as the temperature increased. So this is kind of a similar theme that we're seeing here with these different compaction metrics. Another thing that we noticed was the plant mixed CEI was different than the lab mixed CEI. And this is highly concerning because when you look at a plant mix versus a lab mix, you want to see the same trends because you want that lab mix to be mimicking what's happening in the plant. And that's not what we saw here. What we saw here was the plant mix CEI was always less than 1, but the lab mix CEI you saw went all the way up to almost 4. So there's quite a big difference in the trends here. Now looking at all three of the different compaction or laboratory specimen fabrication methods, you can see in the upper left-hand corner is the plant mix lab compacted. The upper right-hand is the reheated plant mix lab compacted, and the lower left hand is the lab mix lab compacted, and this is with the WEI. And we expected an increase of pressure had to have an increase in WEI, and an increase in temperature would have an increase in WEI, so the same trends that we anticipated for the CEI. But again, same thing, we did not see that difference with the temperature. We saw it with the pressure, but not with the temperature. However, what we did see here, which was encouraging, is that the ranges of these three different compaction types, the three different mixtures and compaction types, were actually similar WEI ranges. And this is very important because this means that WEI was capturing the same compaction behavior whether we were doing a plant mix lab compacted, a reheated plant mix lab compacted, or a lab mix lab compacted. So all three of these, they're not exactly the same, but they are showing very similar trends and they're within the ballpark of each other. Now, as promised, all the data we saw to date was just the chemical warm mix asphalt, but just for fun, we took a look at foaming the asphalt binder and doing a foaming warm mix asphalt, and then we also did a regular hot mix asphalt design. All of these use the same asphalt binder content, we just changed the temperatures that we produce the samples at. And you can see here that the chemical warm mix asphalt, which is in the upper left-hand corner, had by far the lowest CDIs. The foam warm mix was one step up, that 6,000 to 8,000 kilopascal range of the CDI, and then the hot mix was up in that 8,000 to 14,000 range. So the HMA had by far the highest CDI, so it took the most amount of effort to compact your sample from that N equals 8 to 92% density, and the chemical warm mix asphalt had the lowest. And as you read literature, you'll notice that the chemical warm mix asphalt supporters talk about this concept of lubrication, and this could be part of that being seen here. That chemical provides a little extra lubrication, especially at the lower compaction temperatures and the lower compaction pressures. Because you can see another interesting thing is if we just stuck with 600 kilopascals, very similar results to the CDIs across the three different types of mixtures. But as you decrease the compaction pressure, the results start fanning out, especially with the hot mix asphalt and especially with the foam asphalt. And this is very interesting because this means that if people continue just looking at that 600 kilopascal compaction pressure, there are a lot of different behaviors that may be hidden. Perhaps that compaction pressure overpowers everything else in mixtures. And yes, it may compact a sample, but you can't tell the difference between how different samples behave. But as you decrease that compaction pressure, you start to see those differences. So that was one of the very interesting findings that we found. Now this is with CDI. And if we look at WEI, again, hot mix asphalt has the lowest WEI, and then the chemical has the highest. So this is a flip from the CDI, which is good. That's what we were expecting, the trends. Again, we saw that ranking between hot mix, foam, and chemical, and we saw these similar trends between the three. So depending on the chemical compaction pressures and the different types of mixtures, these trends are all relatively the same. And this was really interesting because this meant the WEI was able to compare things from one to another a little more clearly. So in conclusion, we found that the temperature range did not affect the compaction of chemical warm mix asphalt. We felt that the aggregate structure dominated. That was a very interesting finding. We found that the CEI, the CDI, and the N92 had different compaction behavior for the plant mix versus the lab mix, and this is disconcerting because we always assume that a plant mix sample is the same as a lab mix or should behave the same in the laboratory when we compact it in the laboratory. But we did find that the CDI and N92 showed the largest differences between the chemical, the foam, warm mix asphalt, and then traditional hot mix asphalt. So we felt that there's a lot of areas to explore in here in more detail. And finally, the WEI we found provided the most consistent results across the entire testing matrix. So we recommend that you more fully explore the N92, the CEI, the WEI, and the CEI at lower compaction temperatures, and also at different gradations. We only use the one gradation. But we do feel that the WEI was the most promising if we wanted to get the same numbers independent of how we fabricate the sample. So whether it's plant mix, reheated plant mix, or lab mix, the WEI was the most promising in keeping those the same. So I'd like to finish up by thanking AJ and Lou. They helped us out in that compaction trailer, and you just saw an incredible amount of work be presented in a very short time period, and we could not have done that with AJ and Lou, so thank you very much. And the full paper is available from the Journal of Materials and Civil Engineering. The DOI link is located below, so you can find more information there. Thank you very much, and hope you're having a great day.